But even Howard Baker's writing a book about me. It's called 3 by 5, The Measure of a Presidency. Mike Devers, in his book, said that I had a short attention span. Well, I was going to reply to that, but oh, what the hell, let's move on to something else. Now, George Bush is doing well. George has been a wonderful vice president, but nobody's perfect. I put him in charge of anti-terrorism, and the McLaughlin Group is still on the air. But with so much focus on the presidential election, I've been feeling a little lonely these days. I'm so desperate for attention, I almost considered holding a news conference. I've even had time to watch the Oscars. I was a little disappointed in that movie, The Last Emperor. I thought it was going to be about Don Reagan. Now, one example is a story they tell. You know, you have to wait 10 years there for delivery after you order an automobile. And so a fella had finally gotten the money together and was going to buy an automobile. Only about 1 out of 7 families have them in that country. And he went through all the paperwork and everything and finally signed the last paper, laid down his money, and then the man behind the counter said, come back in 10 years and get your automobile. And the man said, morning or afternoon? And wait. The fellow behind the counter says, well, what difference does it make 10 years from now? And he said, well, the plumber's coming in the morning. I know that some of you are no beginners when it comes to writing headlines. Reminds me a little bit of a cub reporter. You knew that something would remind me of a story. A cub reporter whose first solo assignment was interviewing a fellow who was just going to have a birthday that made him the oldest person in town. And he got to the address. It was an older building out in the outskirts of the city, and elderly gentleman ushered him in. He sat down, and the reporter determined he was the man, and he said he was there for the interview, and he led right to the matter about how old are you, and the man said 96. He said, to what do you attribute your longevity? And the fellow said, I don't smoke, drink, or run around with wild women. And at that moment, there was a crash from upstairs. And the reporter looked up, and he said, what was that? And the old boy said, oh, that's Dad. He's drunk again.
You know, there was a time that being a Republican in this area of the country felt a little bit like being Gary Cooper in High Noon, outnumbered in a big way. I remember the story of the fella here a while ago who was running for Congress as a Republican. He stopped by a farm to do some campaigning, and when the farmer heard he was a Republican, his jaw dropped, and he said, wait right here. He said, while I get Ma. She's never seen a Republican before. So he got Ma, and the candidate looked around for a podium to give his speech from. The only thing he could find was a pile of that stuff that Bess Truman took 35 years trying to get Harry to call fertilizer. So he got up on the mound, and when they came back, he gave his speech. End of it, the farmer says, that's the first time I've ever heard a Republican speech. Candidate said, that's the first time I've ever given a Republican speech from a Democratic platform. It can be best described in a story I like. 3 fellows that went out of the building to get in their car and found they'd locked the keys in. They were locked out. And one of them said, get a wire coat hanger, and we straighten it out, and I can get the... And the other one says, you can't do that. Somebody think we're stealing the car. And the third one said, well, we better do something pretty quick because it's raining, starting to rain, and the top's down.
This convention brings back so many memories to a fellow like me. I can still remember my first Republican convention. Abraham Lincoln giving a speech that sent tingles down my spine. No, I have to confess I wasn't actually there. The truth is, way back then, I belonged to the other party. Seems that 25 of San Francisco's top bootleggers, this is a little story to illustrate what I've just said about candor. They were arrested back there in those days of the Volstead Act, and as they were being arraigned, the judge asked the usual question, of course, about their occupation. And the first 24 were all engaged in the same professional activity. Each claimed he was a realtor. And then he got to the last one, the 25th, and says, "And what are you?" He asked the last prisoner, and the fellow says, "Your Honor, I'm a bootlegger." And the judge was surprised, but he laughed, and he said, "Well, how's business?" He said it'd be a lot better if there weren't so many realtors around. President Alfonso and I have much in common. We both have gone through many campaigns and asked for votes from many different kinds of people. Down in Texas during the 1976 primary, they had me out knocking on doors. And I remember one kind of rural area. I'd been governor of California, but I wasn't all that well known in Texas, and I knocked on the door, and an old fellow in his undershirt and jeans came to the door, and I told him I was running for president, and having been in the occupation I'd been in for a number of years, I was kind of surprised when he asked me what I'd done for a living. And I told him I'd been an actor, and then he asked me what my name was. And I thought, well, maybe if I give him a hint. And so I said, well, my initials were RR. And with that, a face lit up, and he turned and he ran back into the house, and he was yelling, "Ma, Ma, come on out here quick. Roy Rogers is outside." So, of course, asking for help suggests a certain degree of trust, which reminds me of a story. It has to do with a fellow that fell off a cliff, and he grabbed a limb on the way down, and there he hung, dangling above the rocky canyon, and he looked up and didn't see anyone, and he finally shouted out, "Oh, Lord, if you're up there, tell me what to do." And a moment later, a voice came booming down from the heavens that said, "If you have faith, let go." Well, he took another look down at those rocks 200 feet below, then looked up again and says, "Is there anyone else up there?" We're to the fourth cartoon. Now, this one, it's titled "The Great Communicator," but as you can see, there's been some mistake there. They left the balloon blank, so I think that I will start filling it in. I forgot what I was going to say. Reminds me a little bit of the story of the man that took his young son-in-law out and was going to introduce him to golf, and told him all that he had to do, and teed up the ball, and the kid took a swing, and he missed the golf ball entirely, but hit a ant's nest there and into the air, and so lined up and took a crack at it, and again hit another gouge out of the ant's nest, and now there were ants flying all the way through the air, and as he lined up for the third try, 2 ants peeked out of the crater that he'd left, and one of them said, "If we want to survive this, we better get on the ball." Being a former Democrat myself, I know how difficult it is. We're proud to have you all with us. I have to tell you that I had started working for the party before I got around to joining it. And one night, 1962 state campaign in California, I was speaking at a fundraiser, and a woman stood up in the middle of the audience and asked me if I'd re-registered. And I said, no, but I'm going to. She said, I'm a registrar. She walked right down the middle aisle, put the paper up, and I signed up, and then said, now, where was I?